When the sandstorm cleared, the village was gone. Not damaged, not buried under rubble. Gone. The entire settlement, its houses, its wells, and the small desert palace at its center, all of it vanished beneath the sand as though it had never existed. Travelers who passed the valley a week later found nothing but smooth, unbroken dunes. That much sounds like an ordinary tragedy. Desert settlements were lost to sandstorms throughout history. But this one was different. And the difference is what has kept the story alive for over 200 years. Because when the sand was partially excavated, generations later, what the diggers uncovered made no sense for a village caught by surprise. Everything was in order. The settlement sat in southern Morocco, at the edge of the deep desert, and it had stood for centuries, a small community built around a modest palace belonging to a local lord. It was not wealthy or important. It appears in trade records only as a waypoint, a place where caravans stopped for water before crossing the sand. Then, sometime in the early 1800s, it disappeared in a single night. The sandstorm that buried it was real. The records of nearby settlements confirm a massive storm that season. But a sandstorm does not explain what was found when the buildings beneath the dunes were finally reached in a survey of the region carried out in the last century. The homes had been closed up carefully. Belongings were not scattered in panic. They were stored, wrapped, put away, as though the families had prepared them for a long absence. The animal pens had been opened from the outside, the livestock apparently set loose rather than left to die trapped. And in the palace at the center, the survey recorded the most unsettling detail of all. The great hall had been swept clean, and its floor laid with rows of woven mats, as if the whole community had gathered there deliberately and sat down together to wait. Now, it is worth being honest here. Not everyone agrees on what this means. Some who have studied the site argue for a simpler explanation, that the village had already been abandoned for other reasons before the storm, and that the orderliness is just how a slowly emptied settlement naturally looks. Tidied homes, opened pens, and an empty hall could describe a planned departure as easily as a planned ending. But that reading has a problem. The woven mats in the hall were laid out fresh for a gathering at what appears to be the very end, not the leftovers of people who had moved away, but the arrangement of people who had assembled for something. And a departing village takes its valuables. This one left them stored, as if the owners still expected to need them and simply were not going to be there, which points back to the harder, stranger reading, that this was not a community caught by surprise, and not a community that quietly left. It was a community that knew the storm was coming. The desert gives hours of warning, building wind and darkening sky, and chose to stay. Why? Why would an entire village choose to vanish beneath the sand when they could have walked away? They left one thing that may answer it. On the wall of the palace hall, above where they had gathered, a single line had been carved before the sand came. And it does not read like the words of people facing a disaster. It reads like the words of people keeping a promise. The carved line, translated, reads, "We were given this place on a condition. The condition has come due. We do not break what was promised." That is all. No explanation of the condition. No name of who the promise was made to. Just the calm statement of people who believed they owed something and had decided together to pay it. Understanding it meant reconstructing the history of the village, and that came in pieces. The first was the inscription itself. The second was a set of trade records from a neighboring town, which mentioned the village's founding generations earlier. And the third, the piece that tied it together, was an oral account still carried by a few desert families of the region, about how that particular valley came to be settled. Together, they tell this story. The village had not always stood in that valley. Its people had come there centuries earlier, refugees from a famine with nothing. And the valley, with its rare, reliable spring, had saved them. But the valley already belonged to someone, a desert lord, the builder of the small palace, who found the starving refugees at his spring. The oral account says he made them an offer. They could stay, use the water, raise their children in safety for as long as they needed, on one condition. And here, the oral version is specific in a way that is hard to forget, that the valley was not a gift, but a loan, and that when the desert came one day to take it back, they were not to resist. They would return it as they had received it, and go with it, rather than fight to keep what had never truly been theirs. For generations, it was an abstract promise, a story told to children. The desert did not come, and the condition seemed like a formality, the kind of old vow no one expects to be called on. Then, in the early 1800s, the great storm rose on the horizon, and whatever they believed, the village acted as though the desert had come to collect. This is the part that is hardest to explain, and the reason the story is remembered at all. The village could have run. Many of them, surely, must have wanted to. These were not people eager to die. They had children, they had lives, and every instinct a person has would have screamed at them to flee. And yet the physical evidence, whatever else it leaves uncertain, agrees on one thing. No one seems to have fled in panic. The homes were closed with care, not abandoned in a rush. The gathering in the hall was arranged, not chaotic. By every sign the site preserved, the people did not scatter. They prepared, and then, as far as anyone can tell, they gathered and stayed. There were no locked doors, no barriers. Nothing physical held them in that hall. If they stayed, they were held there by something with no walls at all, a promise made by ancestors they never met to a lord long dead, about a valley they had perhaps always known, on some level was only ever borrowed. By the evidence we have, the village returned the valley to the desert, exactly as the story says they swore to, and the desert took them with it. So I will leave you with the question that carved line has forced on everyone who has stood in that hall. If your grandparents had made a promise, a real one, a binding one, long before you were born, and one day the world came to collect on it, would you pay a debt you never agreed to? Or would you be the one who walked away and let the promise die with you instead? By every sign they left behind, they chose to keep it, and the only trace that remains is one carved line, and the silence of a hall that a whole village seems to have walked into on purpose and never walked out of. Some people break a promise to save themselves. This village appears to have done the opposite and let the desert erase them, rather than be the generation that broke their word. Now, I want to hear what you would have done. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to know about the throne room that was sealed with the king still inside it, by his own court, on the day he died, that story's coming next. Subscribe, and I will see you there.